here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to be talking about beans, the kinds that I grow, how I put them up, and how I use them. So let's get to this topic, starting off with my favorite kinds to grow. There are two I know that do best for me, and they're the ones I grow every year. And one is well, I should say it's more than two. It's at least three, because I grow the runner beans. They're the scarlet runner, but I also grow the sunset runner variety. They're very, very similar to each other. The only real difference is the color of the bean inside, which can be hard to tell the difference. I have an image here where you can see there's two different shades. One kind of leans more towards purple, or one leans more towards peach. The more purpley ones are the scarlet runners, and the more peach colored ones are the sunset runners. And then their blossoms that they get are a little bit different color. And I like that because it just adds even more color to my garden. I do find that the scarlet runners tend to do better. Overall, I tend to get better germination rate in plants, but generally speaking, they both do really good. And then I also grow the purple potted pole bean. And both of these beans I've been growing for many years. Now, I've tried many other beans throughout the years. Some just do not even germinate. Some will not produce if they do germinate or grow very big. So my fallback are always these two beans. Now, one thing that I really like about the runner beans is that, my personal opinion, not everybody likes them as a green bean, but I love them as a green bean. And here they are canned up. These are the ones from 2021. There could be a couple of purple potted pole beans in there, but even though the purple ones do have purple pods, they cook up green and look very similar in color. Sometimes they'll show up a little bit darker. Anyway, if you pick them when they're about, maybe that long and about that wide and still tender, where you can just crunch right down on them right off the plant, they're so tasty straight off the plant. In fact, I think all beans, if you pick them tender enough, are really good off the plant. And anyway, yeah, they're a great green bean. And then once I get enough canned up that I feel good about my supply, I've got my whole green bean section all filled in, then I allow them to mature so that I can collect the seed for a dry bean. Now, when they mature, when they get full size, they're typically about this. Many can get much bigger than this. In fact, I have several that are bigger than this. I try to keep them on the main plant for as long as I possibly can. But once we start getting into, which at the time I'm shooting this, we're getting close to the heavy rains coming. And then I will take them into the greenhouse to finish drying. But I like to keep them on the cluster as much as possible, because then I can just hang them like that. Otherwise, I have to take them in the house or find another place to lay them on. I do a lot of the drying of them next to the wood stove, but they're a lot easier to shell, and it's best to shell them once the pods, and this goes for any dry beans, once the pods have totally dried up. They'll be thin, they'll be easy to just crush up, they'll be like paper, and they'll be like a real light tan color by that point. Right now, the pods are very thick. As a dry bean, this is what they look like. And typically what I do with those, because a lot of them I want to be able to sell because people will order them from me. And this will be a mix of the sunset and scarlet runner, but it will mostly be scarlet runner. So in my product list, you'll see them listed as scarlet runner. But if you buy some and you end up with some that get peach flowers, well, that's because that's the sunset runner. But anyway, I like to vacuum seal them in jars. And those I will use to either sell, save for seed for the next year, or I will cook them up. I can use them in chilies or use them for the Tar Heel beans. They're really a great bean for that. And they do tend to be a little bit bigger. Now, the purple potted pole beans, I didn't bring any in here because at the time I'm shooting this, which is early September, they're still in a covered area, and I will just keep them in there because I don't have to worry about the heavy rains affecting them and preventing them from drying out fully. My goal is this year, because I really need to build up my seed from those again, is to save most of those for seed. But those get a real nice bean too if you prefer a little bit smaller bean, and they're a tan color, as you can see in this image here. Those would also be a great replacement for pinto beans. in various types of dishes. They make a great green bean, even though they're purple. Remember, when you cook them, they turn green. And they do have a smoother outer pod than these. So some people may prefer those better as a green bean. Now, there's such a plethora of great beans out there, but it's finding what works best for you in your own garden, what's going to grow best for you, what's going to give you the most beans. But just understand, I am in a cool, wet climate, and these are the ones that tend to do best for me. Now, another bean I grew years ago and didn't grow them again, even though they did really well, were the dragon tongue beans. Now, those are a bush bean. And unfortunately, although I know you can find it more in a vining form, I am having a hard time finding the seed for that. But I did go ahead and order up more bush bean seed for the dragon tongue, because those are a really tasty bean. And they're a beautiful bean inside and out, and get a pretty flower on them. I will be growing them again next year. Now, the reason I didn't grow them the following year is because at the time I still didn't have our chickens. And the slugs, bush beans don't typically do great for us anyway. And even though those did, what I found is that with bush beans especially, slugs are more apt to just chow down on those beans because they all stay lower to the ground. And also I found the slugs liked the dragon tongue beans better than my runner beans. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not getting as many beans as I could because the slugs keep eating them. But now that I let the chickens, in fact, right as of now, the chickens are out in my main garden section where I would be growing those, and they keep that slug population down. And then I do fence that area off when I start planting my beans and other plants in there, corn, sunflowers and whatnot, so that, the chickens aren't tearing them up. And then at the end of the season, when everything's tall enough that, they can't harm it, I let them go ahead and roam in there. So that's what's going on now. And they love it. They love it. And they're tilling everything up for me, which is great. All around my sunflowers and my beans and so on. But at any rate, I feel like I could do this now and not worry so much about the slugs, because the chickens just do a really good job. They eat the eggs, they eat the larvae, they'll eat the little small slugs, which tend to be the ones that cause the most damage because there tends to be a lot of them. So while they're still young, they'll just chow right down on them, and that helps a lot. I'm going to also be trying a new bean for 2026. So when I was ordering the dragon tongue, I found a shop on Etsy, Organic Seed. I ordered a few more seeds just to make the most of my order. I found one that looks very similar to the dragon tongue, but the striping on it is more of a burgundy kind of reddish color, and they are more of a pole bean. And so I'm going to be trying those. Those were called let's see, what was the name of it? French horticulture bean, because most years I do try to start at least one new bean and give it a try, and I'm hoping those will do as well as my purple potted and my scarlet runners and sunset runners. I try to be careful not to use up too much space with new beans because I want to try them first, and if they're not going to produce well, I don't want them taking up the space of my beans that I know do well. And yes, I have tried the rattlesnake beans. They do look very similar, but those are not do well here. I think they just don't like our climate. I've heard they're very good producers, though, a lot of good things about them, that I think they can both be used as a green and a dry bean. So now let me talk about how I prefer to preserve the beans. As far as the green bean, that would be in the form of canning. So before I started getting enough beans in to start canning at a time, I was freezing them. That did actually work really good. I would cut them up the same way I cut them up for canning and just freeze them in serving size packs. But then once I started getting more and more beans in each year, then it's like, okay, now it's time to start canning these and saving my freezer space. And I do actually prefer the overall flavor and texture of them canned over frozen. Frozen's fine, but the canned just seems to have a better flavor. So I do like to can them. And there's also the option of dehydrating. Now, in 2023, see, I didn't put in a garden in 2024, so I don't have any beans from there. And I will be doing a video on that soon, explaining why I did it and the benefits of doing it and so on. But I decided in 2023, because things were so crazy and I didn't want to wait until I had enough beans to fill up my big, large canner, because I always worry about them kind of spoiling before I can get enough to fill up the whole big canner. I decided to dehydrate them. Now, I've dehydrated green beans before. These look a little different than the ones I dehydrated the first year, and that's because this time I'd thrown them all in the freezer, and then I was going to can them, and then I changed my mind and decided I'm just dehydrating them all. And so I dehydrated them after them being frozen. And no, it didn't change the ability for them to rehydrate well by freezing. And I tried them several different ways. They don't rehydrate well enough to really use as a side dish or to add to stir fries. But if you're throwing them in a soup or a stew or something that you're going to be cooking for hours, then they're fine. They're really good in soups. I don't mind them at all in soups, because then they get cooked thoroughly and they rehydrate good enough. They're not going to be like this, but they're still good enough. However, I do believe if you cook them first and then dehydrate, they will rehydrate much better than doing it from a raw state. And then some people will pickle or ferment their beans. I personally don't do that, but it is an option. And typically how I use my green beans, other than like using the dried ones, green beans in soups, I just use my green beans as a side dish most commonly. You can add them to casseroles. You can even do the green bean casserole. But I tend to just like them as a side dish. A lot of times I'll throw some onion and garlic in there with them for flavor. They're not the type of vegetable I usually like to mix with other vegetables, like when I'm doing stir fries or fried rice. I just tend to like them as is. But again, that's all going to be a matter of choice per person. Now, let's talk about the dry bean. So, as I mentioned, when I'm drying them for here, because of our very wet climate, I do take them off the plant, hang them in the greenhouse to finish drying. If you live in a dry enough climate where you don't get the heavy fall rains like we do, then you can typically just leave all your dry beans, the beans you use as a dry bean, on the plants and let them fully dry, and then collect them straight from the plant, which is what I'm going to do with the purple potted ones, since they are in an area that will stay dry because it's fully covered. But it's not a greenhouse, it's just a covered area. It's open completely on the one end. And then I just take the beans and just do this, and all that papery thin stuff will start coming off. And then just sometimes you like, these do tend to be a little thicker than certain other beans, like the purple potted, and so sometimes you may still have to crack them open, but it's super easy once they're completely dry. And then your beans will just fall right out of there. And then I do prefer to vacuum seal them in jars. I forgot to bring one of my other jars out here, but other ways that I'll do dry beans, just dried beans in general, be it ones that I've bought like kidney beans, pinto beans, or these beans like this. Another way that you can put them up is to just go ahead and cook them up. You can leave them plain, just cook them up. And then you can, because it takes a while for your dry beans to cook, and then you can dehydrate them. And they will take up a little less space than like that. You wouldn't have to worry about them, getting weevils. So I still vacuum seal them in jars. But I've done this with the chili after I've made it. I've done with the Tar Heel beans after I've made it. Or I've just cooked up big pots of kidney beans or pinto beans and just left them plain. And then cook them, dehydrate them. And then I just did this the other night. In fact, I made some homemade burritos. I was making tortillas. I had a jar of ground beef I'd canned up several years back that I had opened and used a little bit out of. So I wanted to use that up. And then I went and grabbed some of the dehydrated pinto beans I had that I just left plain. And then I just cook those in some water and add some spices in there. And it works out really, really good. And you can add as little or as much water to get the consistency you want. And also that can work really good for making a refried bean. So once they're cooked really well, you can then just blend them up. And now you've got pretty much instant refried beans when you do that. So that, when it comes to the dry bean, that is my favorite thing to do. And then the same thing applies if you're using it as a chili. You make your chili. Used to can up the rest, and I'll still do that from time to time, but I will make a big pot of chili, maybe eat on that for a couple nights, take the rest and dehydrate it, and then put it in jars. It takes up less space than canned, and it rehydrates because it's all been cooked. It rehydrates much quicker that way. You just add water, cook it for a few minutes, and it's ready to go, and it's actually quite good. And I love being able to do that. Another thing I use dry beans for, usually I'm doing kidney beans, but as I start leaning more and more towards my own homegrown beans, I can see especially doing this with the purple potted pole beans, even though they're tan and they're not red like a kidney bean. I've tried growing kidney beans. They don't do good here either. I like to make a tamale pie every now and then. I do have an old video on this that I'll link to down below. Plus a couple other things like maybe the Tar Heel beans. People keep asking me about those. Some people might call them hillbilly beans or just beans and cornbread. I call them that because my father-in-law was a hillbilly, and basically I had to learn how to make these kind of beans with the white cornmeal cornbread thing. And so I just call them Tar Heel beans since he started calling me second growth Tar Heel. And so anyway, that's just my personal name for them. I think I'm the only one that calls them that. The dried beans, whether it be you cook them and dehydrate them or you can them, because that's another way to put them up is to can them. I just don't really like doing it that way anymore. It is a little easier because you just open the jar and dump them into whatever you need them in. But I like the dehydrating better. It's just about as simple because it takes so little time to cook them up. So anyway, that's just it. I wanted to just share that with you, let you know the beans I like to grow best and that do best for me, and a few ideas to preserve them, and a few ideas of what you can do with them, whether you're using it as a green bean or a dry bean. And please share with us down below in comments what are your favorite beans to grow. And also with that, since you're talking about growing, share with us what your climate type is, not just your zone. That's never enough, especially when we're talking about annuals. People need to know what your climate type is like, because zone only tells you winter hardiness. It doesn't tell you whether or not your climate is cool and wet like ours, being in an 8B, as opposed to Deep South Homestead, who's also in 8B, but they're hot and dry. So climate can be very opposite, even of people in the same zone. So make sure you share what your climate is like, or if you want to, even share, at least roughly where you're from. That'll give people a better idea of like, oh, this person lives in a such and such type of place or in that state, and they're growing that bean. I'm going to give that a try. And any other thoughts or ideas you'd like to share, please put those in comments down below as well. And thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.